When people think about submarines in World War II, they picture German U-boats stalking the Atlantic, wolf packs, night attacks, ships vanishing into backwater. Or they think about American submarines in the Pacific, quiet, relentless, slowly strangling Japan's supply lines. But there was another submarine force, one almost never talked about: British submarines. They entered the war with confidence, a proud legacy, experienced crews, high expectations. And they left it with something else entirely: a record buried in reports, losses spoken about quietly, and a role history chose to forget. This is not a story of victory. It is the story of a weapon that did not change the war. This is the story of British submarines in World War II. To understand this failure, we need to go back to 1918. British submarines had performed admirably in the First World War. They had hunted in the Baltic, the Dardanelles, and the Mediterranean. They'd proven themselves as a weapon of naval warfare. When World War II began in 1939, the Royal Navy had every reason to believe their submarine force would once again play a decisive role. They had the boats. They had trained crews. They had a proud tradition. What they didn't have was the right war for submarines to fight. Geography is destiny in naval warfare, and British submarines faced the worst possible geography. While German U-boats operated in the vast Atlantic, and American submarines hunted across the endless Pacific, British subs were confined to Europe's most dangerous waters, the North Sea, shallow, narrow, heavily mined, constantly patrolled. The Mediterranean, an inland sea that became known among submariners by a darker name, the submarine graveyard. These weren't the open hunting grounds where submarines thrived. These were killing zones where every advantage belonged to the hunter above the water, not the hunter below. Axis convoys traveled short distances with heavy air cover. Escort vessels equipped with sonar and depth charges. Aircraft constantly overhead. The British submarine had nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. Let's talk about results. Numbers don't lie. German U-boats sank 2,603 merchant ships, totaling over 13.5 million tons during the war. American submarines in the Pacific destroyed nearly 2,000 Japanese vessels, displacing over 5.5 million tons of shipping, crippling an entire empire's ability to wage war. British submarines? They sank 1,625 vessels, totaling approximately 1.5 million tons of Axis shipping. That's less than 12% of what the Germans achieved. Less than a third of American successes. The disparity is staggering. And the cost? 79 British submarines lost. Over 3,000 men who would never return home. A casualty rate higher than almost any other branch of the Royal Navy. Nowhere was the failure more apparent than the Mediterranean. British submarines operated from Malta, trying to cut Rommel's supply lines to North Africa. It was a mission of desperate importance. If they could starve the Africa Corps of fuel and ammunition, they could change the entire North African campaign. But the Mediterranean was only 2,400 miles long and barely 400 miles wide. Axis aircraft could reach almost any point within hours. Italian and German destroyers knew every approach route. The water was too clear, too shallow, too small. Submarines like HMS Upholder became legends before they disappeared. Between 1941 and 1943, the Mediterranean claimed dozens of British submarines. 50 submarines were lost in Mediterranean operations alone. Some simply vanished without a trace. Others were caught on the surface and bombed to pieces. The hunters had become the hunted. Technology also worked against them. Early British submarines still relied on outdated tactics from World War I. Fire a torpedo, dive deep, run silent. But warfare had evolved. The Axis had ASTIC, what we now call sonar. They had advanced depth charges that could be set to detonate at specific depths. They had aircraft equipped with radar that could spot a periscope from miles away. The submarine's greatest weapon had always been invisibility. But by 1942, there was nowhere left to hide. German U-boats adapted with wolfpack tactics, targeting weakly defended Atlantic convoys. American submarines in the Pacific found Japanese merchants sailing with minimal protection. British submarines? They faced the most heavily defended targets with the least room to maneuver.
This isn't to say British submarines achieved nothing. Of the 2 million tons of Axis shipping sunk in the Mediterranean, submarines were responsible for 53%, more than aircraft or surface ships. They did sink Italian cruisers, including the heavy cruiser Trento. Individual commanders showed extraordinary courage. HMS Upholder alone sank over 93,000 tons of shipping before being lost in April 1942. Submarines like Turbulent, Torbay, and Thrasher became household names in Britain. Their crews were decorated with Victoria Crosses and Distinguished Service Orders. They were heroes, but heroism couldn't change geography. Courage couldn't overcome technology. And individual successes couldn't alter the strategic reality. British submarines were fighting a losing battle in waters designed to kill them. While German U-boats nearly brought Britain to its knees in the Battle of the Atlantic, British submarines struggled to make even a dent in Axis operations. While American submarines turned the Pacific into a graveyard for Japanese shipping, sinking 56% of Japan's entire merchant marine, British subs in the Mediterranean were becoming graves themselves. It wasn't incompetence, it wasn't cowardice, it was simply the wrong weapon, in the wrong place, fighting the wrong kind of war. When the war ended in 1945, British submarines had done their duty, but they hadn't changed the war. They hadn't strangled enemy supply lines or terrorized merchant fleets. They'd fought bravely in impossible conditions and paid a terrible price for limited results. This is the story history doesn't often tell, not of the weapons that won the war, but of the weapon that couldn't. The British submarine force of World War II, the silent service that fought the impossible fight and failed to change the course of history. Their courage deserves to be remembered. But so does the truth.